featured guest, Ben Esgro. And Ben, if you'd like to give us an introduction of yourself, who it is, who you are, what you do, and how'd you get into the scene, and we can kind of just pick up from there.
Sure. That's probably the most difficult thing you're going to ask me today because I'm pretty bad at doing that. But I own DeNovo Nutrition. It's a supplement and nutrition consulting company. I got into this basically because I love the science of basically body composition and program design and everything like that. No one would probably know who I am if it wasn't for Lane Norton, so I have to definitely thank him very much. Yeah, that's basically all I have to say about myself.
For those folks out there, Ben is a very conservative person. He is not out there on like the scenes on the Facebook Natty community where he gets tagged or uploads a video and gets 90 likes. So he's definitely a low-key character, but definitely extremely knowledgeable. I mean, for him, I view him as a walking textbook. So let's see. That's my take. I think huge respect for you.
I appreciate that.
So if we can jump straight to the questions, I figure we can knock out the questions on the Beyond Fitness page first, considering there's only a few questions. If you'd like to knock those out.
Absolutely.
All right, so first question here from Eric Bodhorn. How long do you plan on looking 15?
I love that one. That was a great one.
Considering your degrees and certifications, what are your thoughts on the influx of diet and training coaches with little to no academic background in the field? Do you feel that higher education is necessary to have credibility in the fitness industry? Your thoughts?
I think that is kind of a double-edged sword, and it's tough to give one direct answer on that. Do I think it makes you definitely more centered and have the ability to critically think of things in a scientific physiological context? Yes. I mean, certifications, a lot of people have this argument over certifications and degrees and stuff like that. Well, it's just a test. It's just a test. Yeah, but the point of that test is to prove competency, baseline competency. So to say that's useless, I don't agree with that. To say it's necessary, no, but I think it's a little more difficult to really encompass everything you get in a formal educational experience to do it all yourself. Do I think you can't? No. Do I think people who don't have a scientific background are incompetent? No, I don't either, but I definitely think it gives you an upper hand, and I definitely think it really helps you think more critically because physiology is like connecting the dots. You have to think of things holistically, and if you don't, you tend to have a black and white view of things. That might be a generalization as well, but I guess that's my experience from education, and I just highly value education. So I guess that's my biased answer to that.
I would have to agree with you entirely. My personal take on this is that, for me, I enjoyed the crap out of my physiology classes in college. Actually, one of my professors, who was essentially the kind of like department chair, I guess you could say, of like the human biology department, he was kind of like a huge source of inspiration for me just because he lifted, and it was kind of surprising and shocking to know that, holy crap, like he's aware of all this stuff too, except, he's kind of just like a nobody, like he doesn't really go on Facebook. However, he's very aware of this, and it was actually kind of very exciting to learn from him as well and just kind of open up my views as well on this and kind of just learn that, like you said, physiology is a lot like connecting the dots and that there is no just one black and white answer, that so many different biological pathways can actually be affected by just one act. That's just...
Actually, that brings up something else that I wanted to kind of touch on too, and why I think having an education helps you, or even a research background, even if you just go and read papers yourself, like actual research papers, and do your own interpretation, is it helps you avoid a lot of the stuff people get caught up in that are kind of pseudoscientific phenomena, like stuff that's like an article that's written on the internet. Well, it helps you weed out the junk when you have an educational background, and true. I think that's very strong. There was something else I was going to say, but I totally forgot, so we'll move on.
I was going to say, when it comes to like research, what kind of upsets me sometimes is whenever I see research papers on going full range of motion actually increases, and then X forth and so on and so on. It's like, why would, I just don't understand why someone wouldn't preach full range of motion on a certain lift as opposed to partial range of motion. Like, I don't know how people couldn't see the benefits of actually going full range as compared to partial range. It seems kind of just obvious.
Well, you have to consider the purposes of multiple research scenarios. I mean, there could be a rehab setting where people are trying to get an answer for people who can't, who can't physically go full range. You know what I mean? So I completely respect research, and it's another thing. It gives you direction, and so I'm always for, you know what? Even if you're beating something to death and you're doing more studies on it, I don't think there's ever such a thing of too much, because you can find a lot of new things by doing the same. That's why people say, well, there's only a couple studies on this. You know what I mean? Like, one study is not end all be all. I know that might be sort of a tangent from what you're saying, but
That's fine. Let's see. 3 questions here from. I'm sorry if I butcher your name. I don't want to kill your last name. From Chelsea Landay. Hi Ben. A friend of mine actually purchased your powder months back and loved it. I plan to do the same since I'm actually getting into lifting now, which is awesome. I had a few questions for this Q&A, so I guess I'll read the first one to you. There's 3 questions. What body weight multipliers do you go off of for setting fat loss calories for both females and men?
so you want to separate them and answer each specifically?
Yeah, and then
Okay,
you
yeah,
can
I
answer
think that's
then.
good. I'll be able to keep on one train of thought there. I don't personally use body weight just because I like to consider other variables that are important for BMR and considering somebody holistically. I personally like to use Harris-Benedict. There are other equations. There's Mifflin, St. Gior, stuff like that. I mean, there is research to back it. First, let me say none of them are perfect. So the best thing you could do is, have direct calorimetry, but that's obviously not feasible for people because they can't go, that's not accessible. You need a lab to do that type of stuff, even indirect with the metabolic cart, stuff like that. But based on comparing metabolic cart and these equations, they're pretty darn close. But anyway, the answer to that is I don't like body weight. It's only considering one thing. But the advantage of all of these formulas is you can get a baseline and then adjust off of that. That's the biggest thing, is follow-up. So where you start has no real indication on where you might end up because it's all about how you respond to that intervention. But anyway, I like Harris-Benedict. That's what I personally use.
Wanted to add to that also, pretty much something that Ben mentioned in the beginning, many variables come into play, so aka like your age, like you mentioned, your previous dieting history. Who knows if you just came off a show and then, you didn't tell Ben, for example, and he would put you on what he would have believed to be, baseline calories, and then who knows if you, start gaining weight on that, and then, that just may not add up, and you're kind of thinking, like Ben would probably be thinking, like, wait, something's not adding up in this equation. Then those are kind of variables that I guess you'd have to mention to your coach. Just
That's
for people.
An excellent point that I don't mean to interrupt you, but I do want to build off of that. That's also the importance of not looking at things in that one context, like a generic response to where should I start.
Right.
There's so many factors. That's why you can't just, when you're about to work with somebody, they can't just say, okay, give me your height, weight, age, and gender. Well, you need to know someone's history. What are they eating now? That was a great point. How you've adapted to what kind of intake you have had. We know that absolutely happens. Anybody who's worked with somebody who actually tracks intake and doesn't just give people foods to eat, that's very clear the impact of that. I mean, even in literature, looking at people who are anorexic and the extremes of restriction, it's very clear that BMR suffers. Obviously, your body's trying to stop you from killing itself.
Right, so definitely wanted to bring that up. I guess cool to jump to number 2?
Sure.
All right, let's see. From Chelsea. Most pre-workout powders typically contain ingredients that have been shown to work, however, only taken at multiple doses throughout the day. General recommendation for something 30 minutes prior to a lifting session?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question because it depends how you determine proven to work. I mean, if you're talking stimulant, absolutely, but I mean you can have glucose, or you can have something that actually is just sweet, and it will actually improve your resistance to fatigue during a workout. So I'm not a huge supplement pusher, which might be ironic to some people, but I just like the basics. There's so much uproar about stimulants, and what's coming out there now, and what is adulterated. Just stick with caffeine. It's never going to be banned. Is it going to give you like a crack effect? No, but if you're looking for that, I would actually say then you're kind of missing the point. You should be excited to work out anyway. So you need to look somewhere else if you need something way more than caffeine. I know a lot of people probably won't agree with that, but I like very basic stuff. Some caffeine and absolutely creatine. Creatine is something I think everybody should be taking. Monohydrate, that is.
Not crealkaline. I also wanted to add on there, I know people typically when they first start lifting and they start really getting into supplements, they start to develop a dependency where, oh, dude, I'm running low on whatever product it is, I got to pick some up. And again, I feel that people still fall again into the same rut, even with these proven, research-backed supplements. Just saying that, I don't like to see people kind of, again, fall into the same dependency, but again, with something that I guess you could say is known to work, it just still kind of develops that same mindset. Where it's like, hey,
it's very much a psychological effect of supplements. And actually, that's what my thesis was. It was a lot of qualitative stuff. But one of the things I saw is there was a very big discrepancy between whether people felt their diets were deficient before they started taking supplements versus after they started taking supplements. It was like, before they started taking supplements, it was like 50-50. And then after, it was like 85 or 90-10. And so we put a lot of faith in supplements, but you have to realize that through evolution, we have become quite efficient at adaptation. To think you need a supplement, now think about that word, a supplement, to produce adaptation is a mistake. I think people should really focus more on the important factors and not put too much weight in supplements until they have those really hammered down, which is programming and proper nutrition.
And like you said, also key take home, if you are not looking forward to your training session, you should already be looking forward to your training session. That itself should just be something more inspiring to just get you to want to hit a PR rather than, oh, did I take my 3.4 grams of beta-alanine and my 6.2 grams of citrulline malate? Oh, I didn't take it. Fuck. No. That's my take. Sorry for the coarse swearing. Let's see. Question number 3. What do we expect to see from DeNovo Nutrition in the coming months?
Really the biggest thing is I'm just trying to slowly grow the company, improve things that are right now or in the past were issues, which before was keeping stock of everything. So that's one big thing. I have right now switched to a higher leucine isolate, which is non-GMO, just because I know that's popular with people. And the biggest thing for me was the leucine content. This is actually going to be over 3 grams per 30-gram scoop now. Before it was like 2.7. So it's actually a pretty big jump. And as most people will know who are listening, that's a big measure of protein quality because you need leucine for activation of muscle protein synthesis. But anyway, that's really the biggest thing. Switching to that, it's slow because it's a one-man operation. I'm not funded by anybody, but I'm doing my best. Eventually, I hope to be able to add new things to the line, but I try to really promote. I don't, just like you said, I don't want to promote the idea that people need these things or need supplements or anything like that. Just like I told you before, we started recording. I'm big on novelty and simplicity. I'd much rather put something out that was dosed appropriately in one serving of a few ingredients rather than 30 ingredients that are just on there so you can make a label thing.
Very true. And I figure that pretty much knocks out the Beyond Fitness page questions, considering that we have like 1,000 likes on there. Only so many people like the page. Actually, let me see if I can exit out of this. Okay. I'm going to go to your personal profile now.
Sure.
Let's see. Actually, I wanted to ask you this as well as maybe one question if you want to just quickly knock it out while I'm scrolling over to your page. What are your thoughts on digestive enzymes being sold? Because that is one thing I see so many, maybe this is just me, I notice many women tend to fall for it. Just a lot of females in general tend to say, oh, well, I don't know if I'm really digesting this meal right. I'm going to start buying, and then they buy something extract to increase digestion. What is your take on that?
There's a lot of issues there. Number one, is it a perceived thing, or like, are you convincing yourself that there's a problem there, or is it a clinical scenario? You need some kind of objective test to determine that. Like, I'm not producing enough stomach acid. Well, have you actually been tested to show that you're not? Because otherwise, you're just guessing. You're poking at it, and that's exactly what the business and marketing of supplements want to do. Like, convince you that you're missing out by not using this, which is not the case. You just like I always recommend that everybody who's going to use supplements, especially like in regards to hormones, get your blood levels tested first. How do you know what it's doing if you don't have an objective measure? How do you There's so many confounding variables in somebody who uses something just in general and is lifting. And what if it was a change in your volume? What if it was a change in your nutrition? Like, you need to have some kind of objective control point. But to answer your question directly. For the most part, you have a very efficient digestive system intact. Your pancreas is really efficient at secreting digestive enzymes. So are a lot of things along the GI tract. So, I mean, you have HCl in your stomach. You need that to start breaking down protein. Like, all of these things, there'd be clear signs. Like, if you're not digesting stuff appropriately, you would know, because you'd have diarrhea all the time. Because you wouldn't just feel bloated. And people say, oh, well, I feel bloated.
It's entirely psychological. If they start telling themselves.
So they say, oh, I'm bloated. That must be fat because my stomach's distended. No, bloated is because usually you had a high-fiber meal, and fiber is very osmotic, and it draws a lot of fluid in, so that's going to distend your stomach, and also it's gas-producing. These things all make things, distend. So that goes back to our first question, of when it's dangerous to experience something and make up your own explanation for it.
Very true. So you're like getting totally upset, like ranting off, like
makes money on something. Do I think that there might be benefit in something like a probiotic? Yeah, because that has shown it actually changes something. It actually they're making you actually produce more good bacteria, which might help you digest food. But again, do you need it? Like, is there something wrong in the first place? Or are you just taking it for a quote-unquote insurance policy? And even that, the data on that is kind of back and forth.
Again, people, just maybe my quick 2 cents on this. If we had an inefficient digestive system, we would be screwed and we would not be here today.
Yes.
That's that.
Again, this stuff is in food. You get probiotics in food. So, okay, next question.
All right, I'm reading these off of your personal page. Greg Ferris asked a few questions, so I think I'll just start with one and then just kind of go on from there. So the first one is your personal use of training deloads with yourself and clients.
Quickest way I can answer that is I really like a summated model of microcycles, which basically what that entails is you kind of build up the first 3 weeks, and every 4th week is a drop week, which is a taper week. I don't call it a deload because I look at deload as exactly what you're saying. You're reducing the load, and actually when you taper, that's the worst thing you could do. Sorry, I don't want to sound confusing. When you try to dissipate fatigue, the worst thing you could do is to take away load, because then you have maladaptation. Tapering is different. The point of tapering is to actually peak performance and dissipate fatigue. So the only thing you should be manipulating in a taper is volume, because volume is the primary factor that's causing accrued fatigue. So the 4th week, all I do is I drop volume, typically 50%. You have to track something. So I track volume with myself, and I send a spreadsheet now to my clients so that I can know their volume each week, and then their taper week, they drop 50%. So that's what I use.
Hope that answers your question, Greg. And then he also asked another one. Do you prefer constant training with RPE style?
Well, that depends. Specificity is huge with training and program design. So, what is that person's goal? Do I think that is the most appropriate method to use? Now, this is my personal, because there really isn't a lot of research on autoregulation. I'm only aware of one study comparing it to linear periodization. But if you think about it logically, what you're doing when you're auto-regulating is you're using the percentage of that day's best performance. In normal periodization, you're using 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago's max, and you're basing your percentages off that. Anybody who trains knows that 100% from 4 weeks ago might not be 100% today. So for strength days, absolutely, I like to use auto-regulation for anybody. I apologize for that. But the big thing there is experience. I will not put somebody who does not feel proficient in the lifts or has obvious form issues. I'll try not to put them in auto-regulation split. And I like to try to have people send me form videos so I know where they're at before I put them on something like that, because I don't want them maxing out if they don't know how to even do the lift.
Good point. Let's see. Let's see. I don't know. Let's see. Take time completely off. I assume that's kind of in relation to the deloads.
Yeah. So that's the issue. I'll try to be brief with this, but tapering is a relative process. People look at a lot of programs or a lot of powerlifters. They'll just take the last week off. Well, that really depends. Again, it's volume. A lot of the tapering research is in endurance stuff, but there is some resistance training tapering research, and what you actually want to do when you taper, you want to reduce volume, you want to maintain frequency, and you want to maintain intensity. So think about that. When you train through a whole mesocycle, so about 4 weeks, those training days have served as something to produce adaptation. If you remove that stimulus, you lose adaptation. What happens when you stop lifting after you've been lifting for a while? You atrophy. You're no longer producing the stimulus for adaptation. So the mistake would be to totally deload the muscle, because then you're gonna lose your adaptation. But when I say it's relative, what I mean by that is if you train 1 day a week and you want to taper, well, maybe taking that week off it would be a taper. But if you train 3 days a week and taking the whole week off, if you're used to the stimulus, the continued stimulus of 3 days a week, well, taking the whole week off, you're going to have negative adaptations. Or I won't even say it that way. Or you will not perform the same way you would have if you tapered appropriately. So actually, a popular model to use for that is like a lot of people use Smolov, and the Smolov base on the 4th week, they have you take the whole 4th week off and then you test. Well, what I would contend is that if you actually taper appropriately, then you would perform better on your max day.
Thank you for that. Let's see. I'd also like to hear you talk about high-frequency training and your psychology of training. And that is the last one.
So
here's my I'll just give you guys my psychology on this. That's my psychology. Don't work out, outwork.
Well, see, this is actually something I said at the camp with my the VIP camp with my presentation, which I apologize to anybody who didn't take anything from that. I feel actually very guilty about that because I try to touch on too many things at once. But most people, how do they perceive a hard workout? They perceive it by intensity. So did I get as many reps as I could in that set? That's an issue because a lot of these positive adaptations over time, once you're trained, that we have the training are based on volume over time. What happens if you go to failure on the first set? You say, well, I'm going to go as hard as I can. I'm going to push it to failure. That's what's going to make me grow. What happens is your volume suffers. Anybody who's done this knows the first set, like say you went to failure in your first set and you did 10 reps.
That's going to immediately have an effect.
If you stop short of failure, your volume for the day is going to be higher. Therefore, you have more stimulus for adaptation because you have more overload. People know progressive overload. It's just that they misapply the concept, and they think they're not training hard if they're not going to failure. let anybody do a high volume program and tell me you don't feel destroyed after it. It's just that you need to do it appropriately. And that's also why you need to taper. That's why I like the summated model. Because if you keep doing this balls to the wall all the time, you're just going to feel run down. And that's an issue too. So you kind of get to have the best of both worlds.
Definitely had wanted to say right there, if people, again, didn't kind of to get the takeaway home, or the take-home message, in that you have to essentially, you can't go to your every workout balls to the wall. I mean, I prefer that, for I myself personally, I go in there, I already have, like, let's say, for example, what I'm going to be doing for my workout, that's that, I'm not going anymore, and then I will save, the following progression for the next workout. So if I'm only shooting for 3 sets of 8 on a certain movement, just because I'm with one of my bros and he's hitting a PR doesn't mean that I'm going to go balls to the wall 3 sets of 12, because then I'm not setting myself up for future progression.
It is. It's about, people get lost in the one day, when what matters over time is the week, the month, the year, when it comes down to progress. Because we all know if you're doing it without, I'll just say chemical assistance, and I'm not judging anybody who does. That's a personal choice. I
take creatine, so don't judge me.
But it's a slow process, and what you do over the year absolutely matters, whether you're going to get 5 pounds or a pound of muscle. Well, one other thing I want to touch on really quick with Greg's question with high frequency is, I think it all depends on your starting point. I think it's absurd if you're going to want to, if you go from 1 day squatting a week to 5, you're just going to get crushed. You're not ready for that. It's progressively producing adaptation, not just hitting the ground running, and that applies to everything physiologically. That applies to dieting, everything like that. If you over-restrict, you're going to get a terrible response, and you're going to plateau much faster. If you overreach, we'll call it, and do it too long, you're going to set yourself up for getting injuries.
Again, I know Ben just actually said this, and I'm probably going to sound like a broken record, kind of just repeating him, but I'm only repeating the things that I feel are truly take-home messages that people should really kind of learn from this, and that you don't go from squatting 1 day a week to 5. In the same manner that you wouldn't start jogging on a treadmill for 5 minutes and start doing sprints, like start doing HIIT intervals. It's something that you have to slowly start progressively building on, and that's, again, you can pretty much apply progressive overload to anything, and that's even a perfect example
for life.
For life. And if you guys don't mind, I'm actually going to be inviting our co-admin Josh Anderson. I have no idea what he was doing, but he's a little bit late on this, so let's see if I can get him in right now. Let's see. I'll invite you. We're recording. Josh replied back with word.
Just to finish that off with one sentence, I think you need to look at training status as a continuum.
Very agreed. Let's see. Let's see if Josh can get in on this one. If it still shows a loading symbol, then I figure... Hello, Josh, you there? Josh.
All right, hello?
Hey, so Beyond Fitness here again. Sorry, for the late introduction again. We're here with our co-admin of our page, Josh Anderson. Josh, anything else you'd like to add?
And train hard.
Word.
Test yourself.
All right, whenever Ben is ready, I got the next question for you right now.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm just in the process of going somewhere else in the house.
Sorry, folks, if this may not be the most professionally conducted interview. However, if you talk to both Josh and myself, you'll realize that we're very laid back. We're just doing this.
I'm doing it for the people. I'm going to a quieter place in the house.
Thank you.
Ben, the next question is, how do you lose body fat?
Let's see. Okay, I'll be honest. Next question comes from Matthias Sisu Ramar. I'm not sure if I may have butchered that. I'm sorry.
He's actually one of my clients. He's a good guy.
Let's see. Okay. Hi, Matt. So here we go. How much training volume can a natural athlete before diminishing returns or negative results? Is it something that a roof cap, what the body can handle, and or is this something that you can build up a tolerance to, or is it genetic?
Well, I don't. Do you guys want to contribute at all to that before I say my part?
I'd like to say it truly entirely depends. Many individuals have different workload capacities. Some individuals respond again. I'd like to take an example. Jeff Alberts, the coach from 3DMJ, kind of following his blogs, you tend to realize that someone like him responds more efficiently to lower volume training, whereas some folks just may tend to actually respond better to high frequency, higher volume training. So again, it's something that people really have to start experimenting with before they can find a happy medium. That's my quick little answer.
Josh,
I really don't have anything further to add to that without just rambling on uselessly for like 3 minutes.
Okay, well, I will add my part. That is absolutely true. The response to training stimulus is very individual. There's actually a gene called alpha-actinin, and they think that's partly responsible for training response to resistance training. I know for myself, I actually require a lot of volume to get a response, as opposed to somebody who might be more genetically predisposed to have a great response. Like, I'll just use Lane as an example. Lane is very strong, and I mean, I'm not at all saying he doesn't train high volume. He does, but I mean, anybody who knows, who follows me, I train now 7 days. Well, I train 7 days a week. I was squatting 7 days a week. It changes a little bit, but my volume now is over 50,000 pounds a week for squat, and I'm still making progress, but it's not what someone else might make on that volume. Anyway, we're not talking about me. I want to answer his questions. How much training value can someone handle naturally without diminishing returns and negative results? That depends on adaptation. Like I said, with adaptation as a continuum, or training status as a continuum, it's not about diminishing return or negative results. It's about what is required to produce further adaptation. So number one, you need to track your volume. Number two, is there a roof or cap? You know, that cap comes down to how much time you have in the day to devote to train, how much more volume you can do while living a normal life, and without getting hurt. So training, I mean, adaptation to training, it is building a tolerance. That's why. That's the repeated bout effect. So basically, the answer is it's not black and white. Yes, it's genetic. Can you handle training? You can handle pretty much as much as you can throw at your system until you get hurt. Then you have an issue. So it should be as much as you can handle, while also tracking it in volume.
I'd also wanted to add in there maybe something that called the SAID principle, so the specific adaptation. Yes, that. I wanted to say also, if your goal is to be a powerlifter, train like a powerlifter. If your goal is to be a bodybuilder, train like a bodybuilder, and find the appropriate volume to find that happy medium to where I guess you could say you start seeing progression in what you do. That's maybe something I'd like to throw in there as well.
Well, that's important to say, because I don't want people to inappropriately
misinterpret it.
What's that?
Misinterpret it.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm not saying that everybody needs to go and squat every day of the week to get results. No, it depends what you're doing now. That's why it's important to have a reference point. You need to track your volume, because then you'll see where you are and you could add it in appropriately, instead of just blindly saying, "Oh, well, he said I need a lot of volume. Well, I'm going to go do tons of volume now."
Or
that's the problem, because then you have maladaptation, because you just can't adapt to that stimulus efficiently, as opposed to someone who's trained for that.
Right, where you see people essentially squatting like 3-4 times a week, and that's great, because that is what probably someone will need for their own progress. However, someone could essentially make, I guess you could say, even better progress probably doing half that. So let's say someone like you, where you're squatting multiple times a week, that may be what you need to progress, where someone else may not necessarily need that much volume and that high of a frequency to progress.
Yeah, there's basically, the idea is that there's a maintenance load for training, there's a stimulating load, and there's a detraining load. So basically, your maintenance load is within this certain range of where you're just going to keep that adaptation. The stimulating load is how much more you're going to need to add to actually get further adaptation, and then the detraining load is anything below what your maintenance load is. So the idea behind that is, obviously, I feel like I'm getting away from practicality, so I need to kind of ground ourselves here. And what I'm saying is, if you normally, say you run a program where you were squatting twice a day, you add another day, you gain 30 pounds on your squat. Say something happens and you drop down to 1 day a week of squatting. What's going to happen? You're going to detrain. You're not providing that stimulus with frequency, and probably your volume is going to suffer as well, unless that 1 day you're doing tons of volume. So we need to look at, again, like considering things holistically. You have an acute response that's really important for muscle. We talk about protein synthesis and stuff like that. You drop back to baseline. So it's like the whole bodybuilder split, training 1 day a week, and why it's inefficient for things like hypertrophy and strength for someone who's trained. Obviously, someone who's untrained, it's a whole different story. But I'm done ranting. Let's go to the next one.
All right, folks, we're going to try to keep ourselves grounded on this. And Josh, I don't know if you can get your camera on. If you can get your camera on, that would actually probably be pretty helpful. I actually have Skype Premium now, so.
Well, I'm actually on my phone right now, but I can try to work something out.
Oh, God.
You ruined everything, Josh. Way to go.
Josh, anything else you'd like to add?
Well,
All right, let's see. Back to seriousness here. Let's see. Another question again comes from Matthias. What would you prefer for a client that had been? I'm sorry. Let's see. Having trouble reading that. What would you prefer for a client that had put on a bit more weight than he should during the off season? Myself. Haha. I guess we can start that. Then we'll answer like kind of the continuing question, the follow up from there.
Yeah, I like the cyclical approach to things. I mean, if you've overindulged for a little while, it's actually a nice way to introduce a little bit of caloric restriction at that point. Since if you've been in the off season for a while, you'll get the benefits of adding calories back in. So you'll have a lot of things that will help you lose weight a little quicker. So basically, my simple answer is just using a cyclical approach to quote-unquote bulking, cutting.
See, for someone that put on more weight than you should have during the off-season, I mean, I'm just going to be honest. I'm not sure if this is the answer that you want to hear, but I would say, like, who cares? Like, you can easily drop the weight within maybe the first 3 or 4 weeks of dieting. It's something, I assume that if you're tracking your intake like most bodybuilders do, then assuming you probably didn't go too heavy, maybe only roughly a few pounds over than what you'd like to, where you would have liked to have ended up, essentially. So 3 to 4 weeks of dieting, pretty much like Ben put it, should clean you up, and then from there you can kind of decide how you want to approach it.
Yeah, it depends, again, on the context of the situation as well. Like, if this is somebody who has heavily restricted for a long time, it's going to be a bigger issue if, in 3 weeks they put on 20 pounds.
Right.
But I would argue that if you're controlling under someone's guidance, that shouldn't be happening. That's usually someone who binges off plan, we'll say.
Let's see. A 20 to 25 week diet or a slower diet to give the client enough time to get a feeling. How much time is needed to get in shape?
Again, heavily dependent on the individual and where their starting point is. But the one generic answer I can give to that is more time is always better. Always. All of the negative adaptations you get to dieting, to, we'll say, extreme caloric restriction, are because of cutting too much too fast. Well, a lot of them. And you can avoid a lot of the typical things that people experience if you just give yourself enough timeline, like dropping strength, having big reductions in BMR, stuff like that. So more time is always better, always.
I totally want to agree with you. And something that I know I made a video on this and kind of realized that people don't typically apply this in their, I guess you could say during their contest prep, is an actual, wow, excuse me, I lost a diet break. There we go. And I realized that many people figure, hey, I'm just going to rough it out 24, 25 weeks, go straight through, and then it's just one of these things where a diet break is so beneficial to someone that's contest prepping, in my opinion. I mean, I'm talking to my friend Eric LaRoche. I don't want to butcher his name, but him and I have been talking. I mean, the dude is, he's one of my good friends, and even he told me, like, yeah, we're taking it very slow. And you had mentioned as well, kind of like on the Facebook comment section, huge props to you taking a longer approach to a prep, that the end product is going to be just that much more better.
Well, it's just, you need to consider, again, I like to repeat myself because a lot of things, again, in physiology are redundant, and it's holistic. You need to consider somebody not just as a physical person, but also psychological. And the less you have to restrict stuff in the long run, it's usually easier to adhere to. I mean, what's the biggest problem with most people with dieting or contest prep is attrition. That's the biggest thing that stands in your way of success or getting really lean. That's why most people want to do it in a shorter time frame because dieting is going to suck. But if you give yourself more time, it makes it more livable. You don't have to drop as low. You could do things that make you happier, like again, keep your strength, stuff like that.
Very true. Let's see. Another last question. Josh, I don't know if I can ask you, but are you on your cell phone right now?
I am.
Yeah, would you mind getting on a computer because I noticed that there's a bit of a lag.
Yeah, hold on just a second.
All right, I'm going to quickly just kick you out. Word. Okay, sorry, but I noticed with him, like, there was just a lag that was kind of popping up, so sorry for that, folks. Hopefully that's cleared up. One last question from Matthias. I have heard a lot of people who put natural bodybuilders in question refer to a formula that calculates your limit as a natural athlete. Something that I think is very limiting for natural athletes who take it for a fact. So the question is, does this formula have any scientific merit, or is it more of a very rough estimate?
Even if there was a great study published on it, I think it's just an awful mental approach because it's self-limiting. I think you just need to go in and progress is progress. You need to not put these restrictions on, well, this is the most I can do in this time period. You need to just look at, well, am I progressing? And I think that's a big problem with a lot of people, why they get so frustrated and upset and maybe burnt out on stuff. Or they compare themselves to it like, well, this equation says I should be able to gain 10 pounds this year, but I've only gained 5. This year was a failure. I just think it's not setting yourself up for long-term success. So my personal opinion is just not to put too much weight in those things and not get too caught up in them. I know that's not really answering the question, but I think it's a useless thing to waste your time worrying about.
I have to agree with him. I mean, eventually I feel like the more that I started to enjoy training more, the more I stopped kind of giving a crap and thinking about those calculators.
Absolutely.
The more you kind of just say, hey, wow, dude, I kind of want to just go into the gym and see if I can hit my sets and maybe even shoot for a PR. Yep. That'll eventually kind of take your mind off of the genetic limit because when
you know what, though? Those daily things, life is all about building momentum in accomplishing anything. And those tiny goals add up, obviously, in a long time span, they add up to a bigger endpoint. So you have to be able to see it like that. Because you know what? I was the same person before. Like, I was the same scenario as I now try to get people not to do. It's like getting caught up in all of those little tiny factors or worrying about, this is my limit, this is too much. And I totally enjoy so much more everything fitness-related that I just have stopped getting caught up in that stuff.
Yeah, so seriously, start enjoying training more, and I promise you'll seriously stop giving a crap about those calculators, because I know I did.
Yeah.
And right here is the huge money question that Eric LaRoche and I know a lot of people have about peak week, so get ready for people to pick your brain at this one. Front load or back load carbs during peak week?
I think that really depends on how lean you are, number one. My personal approach is I don't tend to front load people. There's really no scientific reason for that. If someone's lean enough, again, we discussed this a little bit. If someone's lean enough, as long as you're not giving them some kind of absurd energy intake and amount of carbohydrates, they're not going to gain back all of the fat they lost in an appropriate time period that they might have dieted. There's scientifically, obviously, because these people don't carry out studies in order for bodybuilding application, there's a lot of limitations in taking the glycogen supercompensation studies and trying to apply them to a bodybuilding peak week because those studies don't care about body fat. None of them look at body fat. They solely look at glycogen supercompensation. So one thing you need to look at or consider, when you look at these studies that say, 8 to 10 grams per kilo of carbs to supercompensate, stuff like that, well, that might make you glycogen supercompensate, But if you're really worried about, gaining some fat and doing this process, which everybody is who competes, there's one huge missing piece of that puzzle. Well, how much are you adding to adipose tissue too? I mean, you have to realize GLUT4 is on adipose as well, not just muscle. So it's like I said, I don't front load people. Do I think it's a bad approach? No. But if someone has been refeeding the whole prep, you have a pretty good idea of how they respond to a higher day. It all depends on how high you're planning on taking them. And I'm willing to go a lot more extreme with myself than I am with people. I generally stay pretty conservative because how you glycogen loaded somebody is not going to make them win a show. Some people might argue, well, it might be the difference, if it's marginal between first and second, but I don't know. I just think what you did previously throughout the whole prep is a way, way bigger factor.
That should at least give you a baseline idea of how you do respond to that higher day.
Yeah, exactly. At the end, do I think it's going to make that much of a difference if in both scenarios you're carb loading somebody? No, I don't. I think it all depends on, again, the person, how lean they are, how high their carbs were, obviously, during prep. Because if someone has been dieting on 100 grams of carbohydrates and you try to give them 800, you might have some issues with that, especially with bloating and how somebody feels. Again, carbohydrates, they're osmotic. So it's going to draw a lot of fluid into your GI tract. So it depends. It depends. Typically what I'll do is I'll have people eat stuff they know they can tolerate, lower fiber stuff that day, and obviously control their energy intake and just manipulate their macros for that day.
Also, something I kind of wanted to add, I'm not sure if many people are aware of this, but there is something, maybe you've heard of it, called skip loading.
I have never heard of that, no.
So essentially it's a guy named Skip. He's a prep coach. I believe he's out of Florida, and kind of like something that he was known for was essentially having these massive refeeds with his clients. So I think anywhere upwards from like 800 to like 1,200 grams of carbs was like nothing uncommon. But again, it's a process that they essentially did the entire, during their entire prep.
Wow. Yeah, but so then he would know the response.
Exactly, and some people kind of played it out to be like, oh wow, he just started doing this like last week of the show, and it's like, no, he was doing this the entire prep. So
that is the biggest factor it comes down to for me is adding in a new variable at the end of the prep when you've never tested it before is a way bigger issue than front versus back loading. So above all, that's the biggest thing, is you should not do anything crazy dramatic in the last week. Because obviously, if you've got lean in the past 29 weeks, why does the whole equation need to change in 1 week? It's like you're trying to reinvent the wheel and trying to squeeze out whatever you can in a smaller time frame than is realistic.
Whew, okay, whoa. I hope you don't mind, but I'm gonna try to knock these last few questions out because it's almost reaching the hour marker.
I knew that was gonna happen.
Saw it coming. Let's see, LIS or HIT?
Well, we talked about specificity. That there's multiple avenues I can answer this question. I'll try to make it brief, but I'm terrible at that, as you've seen. Specificity. If you lift weights, if you want to be stronger and more muscular, we all know what you do to gain muscle. You lift weights. So I think the first approach should be attempting to increase your frequency or volume in training. If you don't want to do that, you like doing cardio, then I think you should do HIT, because we know the research promotes that as better than low intensity for, muscular things and everything like that. If you really love doing running and stuff like that, again, it's a battle of attrition. If you want to go run, do it. But if you're looking for what's going to be the best for my endpoint as far as keeping muscle and strength, then the first thing on your hierarchy should be increasing frequency of training. It's actually one of the things I ask everybody in my training questionnaire is do you do cardio because you want to or you think you have to? And then if they say, because I think I have to, I say, well, would you be open to doing more frequency in training?
Want to do cardio, lift weights faster.
Yeah, I like that one.
Let's see, and the last question from Eric is, what kind of split do you feel is optimal during prep?
The one that is giving you again, that's really hard to make a generic answer, but anything that's giving you results in the off season, it's just you need to still track everything. You need to still track your volume. You need to still produce progressive overload. If you stagnate all of that stuff and train the same volume, you're obviously not going to get any positive adaptations, further positive adaptations. At best, you're just going to maintain. So all of those principles that we talked about before, they still need to be implemented in a prep. And that's the benefit of adding frequency and volume, is you could potentially, what I've seen with a lot of my people and myself is get strength increases even during prep. So I just think there's a lot of advantages.
You mind if I kind of cut you off? Because that was actually one of the questions that was a follow-up in kind of like in the lower section of the comments, how to gain strength on a cut.
Yeah, again, need to track volume and frequency. It depends on where you are. Obviously, I'm not saying everybody needs to go in and add a bunch of strength days when they're dieting. That's going to be a recipe for disaster because you're dieting. But if you're very tolerant to high volume training, then that's a good solution. If not, you could do power days, which are not going to cause as much damage or fatigue. Or just like you said, you could do like something like circuit. Actually, one of the recommendations I have for people is, and this is another way to attack a prep where if you have weak points. If you're a power lifter or you're worried about keeping strength on a cut, then add in a strength day. If you are solely focused on bodybuilding, then split up your body in that day and do an AM and PM session. So if you do chest and back, like say back is your weak point, well, you can focus on back better than if you split it, and you get the benefit of doing something more specific and burning calories. So again, I don't know. I guess I don't have anything else to say with that, but
hope you guys got the got the general answer, at least how we would approach that. Let's see. A question from Justin Janoska.
Yeah.
Let's see. I know you've mentioned the topic, or I know you've mentioned to be some thoughts on saturated fat, but if you could elaborate on the topic and what latest research you have seen on it, I'd be really interested in that. Also, if you have an opinion on LDL, HDL levels.
So these things are kind of intertwined. Before I even say anything, I don't want people to think there's an undertone to what I'm about to say. I don't want people to say, well, he's a carb guy. He's not a carb guy. That's missing the point of what I'm about to say. Thoughts on saturated fat? It's not. There's a major issue that we have. A lot of people have in general nutrition, and that is silver bullet approach to nutrition. Thinking it's trying to give this good or bad title to certain macronutrients, but you need to consider one of the biggest things is energy balance. You can still oxidize saturated fats. That's one huge thing. Another thing is we're talking saturated fat intake versus plasma saturated fat. Plasma saturated fat is actually it is a negative factor for heart disease, atherosclerosis. But interestingly enough, there's been a couple meta-analyses that have shown that it's either a neutral effect of saturated fat on heart disease, or that there's no negative effects. More so that increasing polyunsaturated fats benefit more than that. So what it comes down to is, what are you replacing saturated fat with? Because one of the problems is if you replace with carbohydrates, there's an issue there. Actually, carbohydrates, very heavy carbohydrate diet actually changes. How I want to say this is you actually have a clinical signature of your macronutrient distribution based on blood work, lab work. And actually, one of the negative things you have from a carbohydrate dominant diet, this is actually with caloric levels controlled, like isocaloric.
Wait, Ben, could you give us an example of what percentage of the diet would, I guess you could say, consist of carbohydrates when you're referring to heavy carbohydrate?
Yeah, I mean, like maybe even like a typical ADA diet, like 55-60%. And before I even go into that, I think another thing you need to consider is someone's body composition going in. Because if someone's lean, that's going to be way different than someone who's fat and insulin insensitive. But anyway, one of the things that is clear that we see is changing postprandial. It's called DeNovo lipogenesis. That's actually part of where I got the name DeNovo from. It's basically creating fat from a new source, a non-fat source. And actually that increases with a high carbohydrate diet. And so basically your plasma triglycerides actually go up more from a high carbohydrate diet than they do to a higher fat, lower carbohydrate diet.
And that's primarily just due to oxidation of fat.
What's that?
I would assume that's primarily due to the increased oxidation of fat. So let's say that you have a higher fat intake, more oxidation.
Well, that is one of that's one of the adaptations. Absolutely. So you're actually putting more saturated fat in the plasma from a higher carbohydrate diet because you're making a saturated fat. It's palmitate. So that's part of it. As far as new research, that's not really something as heavily researched to my knowledge. There's a lot of really good stuff by Jeff Volek on the role of saturated fat, stuff like that, but he might get the title of an anti-carb guy, but it's just because he's, over a decade he's been doing, and he's been funded by Atkins and lower carbohydrate stuff. It's very interesting. I just think, again, you need to consider the context of things, maybe clinically versus a bodybuilder versus anything like that. So again, not saying carbs are bad, not saying carbs are great. I think you need to consider the context and how someone tolerates it. But there's definitely, like I said, a clinical signature, a difference in blood markers depending on how you distribute your macronutrients. Oh, actually, one final thing with the HDL and LDL. Another thing we know from the low carbohydrate diet versus the high carbohydrate diets is they do differentially change your HDL and LDL levels, and that's partly due to the weight differences, the differences in weight loss. And I know there's a confounding variable there with controlling protein intake, but there's subfractions of LDL. So the issue with LDL is actually the small dense particles, the particle size, and not the big fluffy ones. And actually you get, again, a higher carbohydrate diet tends to create more of these small dense ones versus a lower carbohydrate, higher fat diet. So again, am I trying to tell people they need to eat low carbs? No, absolutely not. Again, a lot of this depends on your body composition, your body type, but there definitely are differences, and we can spend literally an hour talking about this, so I'll stop there. I just don't want people to
misinterpret it.
The wrong thing from what I'm trying to say.
Let's see, I guess this is the last question, and then I'm going to use Washington. But let's see, this last question comes from Michael. I've never been good at pronouncing, I think, Italian last names. Don't hate me. Lavoliette? I'm so sorry. I'm just going to call you Michael for the purposes of this. Mike L. Post-workout insulin spike and its validity. As I've seen 2 MS and 1 PhD trash the idea just in the past week, despite having read an article in the past with citations, article non-peer-reviewed, but citations are peer-reviewed, saying that a post-workout cocktail containing 2 1-to-1 whey pro, maltodextrin, and dextrose should be consumed immediately post, and another sipped throughout the anabolic window, with the amounts of each dependent on fat-free mass.
I think that's actually a great example of what we were talking about before, about getting caught up in really, really minute things that don't matter that much in the long term. What do we know definitely matters? Protein synthesis and how it responds from training. I mean, you have more degradation after training. You definitely need amino acids after training, definitely. But the whole thing with fast and slow digesting carbs, stuff like that, the biggest factor is if you're going to be training again that day with fast digesting carbs. As far as getting so caught up in that, I just, no, it's crazy. Am I trashing the idea of that? If you're, obsessing over, I need to have my fast digesting carbs, blah, 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 post-workout, then I am trashing it. Because I've never seen anything to suggest that it leads to any kind of gains in fat-free mass above still giving amino acids post-workout. Do I think somebody like Alan Aragon might be more qualified to answer that? Yes, because I think that he actually published a study on something specifically on that. But I've never seen anything to suggest that makes any kind of difference, because, again, it's an acute thing, and acute is very different than chronic as long as you're providing amino acids and some glucose.
That is it. Ben, do you mind if I be right back in 1 minute?
Sure.
All right, so this kind of question again was from Michael L. And I guess this is kind of optional if you would like to go into detail with this. In addition to front-loading or back-loading your carbs, so that topic we touched on earlier, how exactly would you go about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard to give a generic thing. I mean, again, the research that's been done on glycogen supercompensation says 8 to 10 grams per kilo, but I definitely don't think that's appropriate for someone who's been dieting for a long time. It depends on carbohydrate level, how someone's tolerating them.
Mind if I quickly add in there?
What's that?
I was going to say, if I can just quickly add in there, I know that you said, 8 to 10 grams per kilo, so for Mike, for you, I don't want you kind of getting the wrong idea that, hey, I've been dieting, let's say, like, on 150 grams of carbs, like, the week before peak week, really kind of pushing it through, and then the next week, well, the research said 8 to 10, grams per kilo, and then I do it, and then I spill over and blow up.
Well, exactly. That's, again, these studies did not look at how much of it was also, we'll just call it adipose supercompensation, in addition to glycogen supercompensation. They have also shown that you don't need to actually deplete to supercompensate, but that's kind of a moot point here as well, just because, considering the context of a bodybuilder. But yeah, it's really hard to give a specific answer. Like, it'd be easier to answer that if I had a scenario of what someone was dieting on and stuff like that. But in the general spectrum of everything, I still see it as a very minute detail in as far as success coming show day compared to a lot of other bigger factors.
Mike, if I can just say this, if you have veins on your ass the week before your show, the last thing you need to worry about is how your peak week is going to, roll out for you. It's not going to make it or break it. If you have veins on your ass and you look phenomenal, you will look phenomenal at your show.
Yeah, you're, just like I said before, having an extreme approach, if something has been working really well, it makes no sense to me. And if you're ready, you're ready.
That is it. And I know Evan Godby had posted a question. I'm not sure if you'd like to go over it in a separate video. Maybe if people want to kind of go more in depth with these topics with you, if they enjoyed this. His question was, perhaps if you could go into the deload versus taper thing discussed, simple, and I think some people would be interested in it, or if you'd like to cut off because it's already been an hour, and we could make that a separate video.
I actually already addressed that. I feel like I don't think there should be anything additional, just that I think tapering should be done for anybody who's looking to peak performance, and you shouldn't be dropping load in a taper unless there's an absolute reason for it, an injury or something like that. But then that's a whole different ballgame.
Very true. So I think that will wrap up the Q&A with Ben Esgro, owner of DeNovo Nutrition. I'm going to link his website down below so you guys can buy his product and buy his shit. Because I support it and I'm not getting paid for it. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Actually, yeah. If someone's actually looking on the site right now, like in the immediate future after this, I'm not going to be fully restocked probably until maybe the end of next week, because I'm waiting on a new shipment to come in of my raw protein material. So all I have right now is like 1.6 bags of candy bar. So you guys can buy those up, but that's all I have in stock right now.
All right, so like I said, guys, Beyond Fitness, like the page, like my shit, like Ben's stuff. Support Ben. You know what he's doing. He's actually a very reputable guy. Again, I support him. Beyond Fitness supports him. Josh supports him, but his connection was lagging horrendously. So that is it. Thank you guys for watching. Please don't do drugs and stay safe.
Thank you very much.